Welcome to Mind, Muscle, and Metabolism, the Jade Teta podcast. Here you get the in-depth science and practical tools needed to change your body, optimize your health, and elevate your mindset. I'm Dr. Jade Teta, and here is what I want you to know. You are different. You are as unique on the inside chemically as you are on the outside physically. And those differences matter. They matter because there is only one rule to achieving optimal health, fitness, and body change. That rule: do what works for you. My goal is to help you understand exactly how. I'm so excited you're here. Your transformation starts right now. Okay, everybody, welcome to the podcast. This is Dr. Jade Teta, and this is a Q&A podcast, an opportunity for the patrons of the podcast to send in their questions. I do this because at Metabolic Effect and at jadeteta.com, I get questions every single day. Those of you who are in the field and are in the influencer internet world do realize that there's questions coming in all of the time, every single day, and they are impossible to answer for several reasons. One, there's just way too many of them, and there's only one of me. And two, there's a fairness factor here because people pay for programs and services. And so if we just made ourselves available to answer all the questions that come in, some of them, you'd be surprised actually the kind of questions that we get. It's literally like, all this stuff, a whole paragraph or 2 pages of stuff, and, please tell me what to do. And, obviously that's not the way it works. And, it's just not fair to the people who do pay for services. And so for those 2 reasons, I started the Q&A podcast a while back when I was with Metabolic Effect, and now I'm doing it with jadeteta.com. And essentially, if you want your questions answered, you can submit your questions when you pay for the Patreon service. Right now it's $12 for that service. It might be going up soon. But when you pay for the service, I send out an email prior to doing a Q&A podcast, and you can then submit your questions. And then I take 60 minutes to answer them in full or as long as I have. So typically you go 60 minutes, sometimes a little bit shorter. But okay, so let's get into the questions. And the first question here is, can you please review the effects of prolactin in the body, its effects on insulin, estrogen, and progesterone, and why some women breastfeeding gain weight? Okay, interesting. I think I answered that last Q&A podcast, but just in case, I will answer it again. So for those of you who are interested in hormonal weight loss and fat loss, the first thing I will say here is that we kind of need to make a distinction between hormonal weight loss and fat loss. For some reason, people get way too enamored with the hormones, and they act as if hormones are the end-all, be-all, because they hear things like insulin is a fat-storing hormone, and they hear things like if thyroid levels are low, you can't burn fat, and all kinds of things like this. And the truth of the matter is that we do not want to be looking at hormones in this way. When I talk about hormonal weight loss, I'm not talking about estrogen and progesterone and testosterone and the sex hormones. I'm talking about all of the hormones that impact hunger and cravings and energy levels, which then impact our food choices. This is why I always talk about hunger, energy, and cravings, HEC or HEC, or sleep, hunger, mood, energy, and cravings, SHMEC. HEC and SHMEC are indirect, subjective ways that we can evaluate the hormones that impact our bodily sensations that determine whether we will overeat or not. So the most important thing that we need to concern ourselves with when we're worried about weight loss and fat loss is calories, not hormones. However, when we think about hormones and we say, well, hormones impact calories and calories impact hormones, in other words, you eat a bunch of calories, no matter what those calories are, you're going to be increasing fat-storing hormones, including insulin. Likewise, if your hormones are in balance, things like insulin and glucagon and estrogen and progesterone and testosterone and prolactin and thyroid and adrenaline and cortisol and things like this, they can impact what you eat and whether you're able to sustain a low-calorie diet. So calories matter and hormones matter. So we do not want to be thinking them as separate, and one is more important than the other. They are equally important, but in the end, you must create a calorie deficit. So to lose weight, you need both a calorie deficit and hormonal metabolic balance. And when I say hormonal balance, I mean primarily the hormones that impact hunger, energy, and craving. So those are going to be things like insulin and glucagon and the incretins, GLP-1 and GIP and CCK and PYY and all of those types of things, as well as the hormones that determine metabolic rate and function, things like thyroid and adrenaline and cortisol and human growth hormone and testosterone, and hormones that determine reproduction and where we store body fat, estrogen, progesterone, those kinds of things. So I mean all of them. So I'm only bringing that up because a lot of times women will say things like, hey, I'm not losing weight and I just started taking estrogen and progesterone. Why aren't I not losing weight? I'm taking care of the hormones. And I think that's just a little bit of, too simplistic and not really understanding what we mean when we say hormonal weight loss. What we're essentially saying is balancing all the hormones, primarily the ones associated with hunger and cravings, to lower the calorie load. So that being the case, what about prolactin then can impact these hormones and potentially lead to a situation where we are or a woman is not able to lose weight because they're breastfeeding? Well, think about it like this. Breastfeeding does not cause weight gain, okay? Does not cause weight gain. It can slow weight loss. And so here's what we know in the research. What we know is that a woman who is bottle feeding their child once the child is born versus a woman who is breastfeeding, the bottle feeding woman, the one giving her child the bottle instead of the breast, will lose weight faster than the woman who is breastfeeding. They will lose weight faster. However, when you trend over time, what ends up happening is there's something about breastfeeding that is very good for, obviously, the baby. That's a no-brainer. But also very good for the woman's metabolism over time. So that they may lose weight more slowly, but they actually end up being leaner and healthier later as a result of breastfeeding. So prolactin is interesting in this regard because, yes, prolactin has some effects on insulin sensitivity and may, I don't know this part, impact other hormones responsible for hunger. But let's just think about this without going into the biochemistry. Let's think about this from a common sense point of view and assume that if the body knows how to create a baby and support that baby in the womb for 9 months, then it's going to also have the intelligence to know how to support that baby once the baby is out of the mother's body. And that intelligence is going to essentially say, produce milk and make sure that you hold on to your fat reserves in case we get into a situation where food is not readily available, which would have been the case in our historic hunter-gatherers, not knowing when food and the next meal would be around. Your metabolism does not realize that there's a Starbucks and a Wendy's and a McDonald's on every corner now. It still thinks that there's a potential for food not to be available, so it's going to hang on to those fat stores. We evolved this genetic machinery, this metabolic machinery, to make sure that that mother could sustain both herself and the baby. And so as long as you're giving the body the signal that you need to nurture your baby, the body's going to want to hang on to that fat in a very simple way. And it'll put a lot of different hormonal things into play as a result of that. However, we also know that some very positive things are happening if you breastfeed. And therefore, doing that will make you leaner over the long run. So breastfeeding does not cause women to gain weight, but it can slow weight loss. And that's why a lot of women will see themselves start shedding the weight that wasn't coming off after they wean their baby. So that's hopefully that answers that question there. And by the way, when you are pregnant, a pregnancy is a time of both estrogen and progesterone, but a little bit higher progesterone levels. That's what maintains the baby and the placenta after the corpus luteum, basically degrades, or after the egg is fertilized. Basically, the corpus luteum for a while will sustain that, then the placenta will take over progesterone levels. And so pregnancy is a very high progesterone and estrogen time, and so is breastfeeding. And so as far as that goes, it may not be prolactin at all. We know that when you are in more estrogen times, you're going to be a better fat burner and a better muscle builder. And when you're in more progesterone dominant times, you're going to be a worse fat burner and a worse muscle builder, and maybe more of a fat storer if you're increasing calories. Now, the other thing I'll say about this as far as it goes with pregnancy and breastfeeding is a couple things. The advice that doctors give you to eat for two, or that women think they should be eating for two when they're pregnant or breastfeeding, is not true, period. It is not true, and it is bad advice. The amount of calories needed to sustain the baby in the first trimester, I think, is nothing. And in the second trimester, I think it's only like 30 to 60 calories, if my recollection is correct. And in the third trimester, it's just slightly more. So in other words, you don't really need hundreds and thousands of extra calories. You only need tens of hundreds of extra calories. And that probably holds through for breastfeeding as well. And so do not overeat. As a matter of fact, let your hunger and your cravings dictate and your body fat stores dictate. You can look at yourself, and if you're not underly lean, then decrease your calories, despite what your doctor says. I'm talking about breastfeeding now. You don't want to decrease your calories when you are, in pregnancy. You definitely don't want to do that. But if you have the resources on your body, you can certainly begin to watch your eating and exercising and things like that with your baby on the breast. So hopefully that makes some sense. Okay, Jade, what is your take on intermittent fasting? Dr. Mike T. Nelson talks about 5 interventions, and IF is his number 3. But I work with a lot of women with thyroid issues, so to me, this is a big no-no. Okay, well, I think anyone who listens to me knows I don't like any of these rules. Like the idea that there's a rule that you have 5 interventions and your intervention is number 3 is intermittent fasting should be a rule for everybody is not true. And I'm sure, I don't know Dr. Nelson, but I'm sure if we were talking to him, he would probably agree to that. He's probably, what he's doing, and most of us do in this field, is they just say, look, based on my particular clinical experience, one of the most powerful things I have seen is intermittent fasting, and therefore I put it as my list of number 3 in my top list of 5. That's probably what he's saying. So where would I put intermittent fasting? I wouldn't rank it at all, actually. I would say it works really, really well for some people and really, really poorly for other people, and that is independent of whether these people have thyroid issues or not. Simply, there are too many variables with intermittent fasting. Some people can wake up, skip breakfast, get to lunch, have a salad, and feel fine. Other people will get up, skip breakfast, get to lunch, and are just craving and jonesing for food so much that they end up binging on donuts, pizzas, burgers, and everything else. And we all know this. The people who have this effect know it. It is ludicrous and asinine to assume that we're all going to respond to intermittent fasting the same way. We have different metabolic tendencies, different psychological sensitivities, and different personal preferences, and we have to honor that. And so you cannot distill this down into, all thyroid people who have healthy metabolisms will do well on intermittent fasting, and individuals who have low thyroid won't do well on it. I've seen all over the board. I happen to do very well on intermittent fasting personally, and I have thyroid and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I do very well on intermittent fasting. And so that's something that I would say. Now, my take on it, is that you have to do what works for you. So I say this over and over and over again. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's absolutely true. Like Bruce Lee said, it's my favorite quote for a reason because it sums up exactly how this works. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. So, if you are someone who has gotten the basics down and are eating and exercising in a relatively consistent way, and not eating like an asshole, basically, you're not eating, donuts and cakes and just eating whatever you want and then being like, I'm not losing weight, but you've actually taken out the junk food, you've, increased your vegetables to be the dominant part of your diet. And here's an interesting thing, right? How many people who say they're not getting results from exercise and diet, how many people can actually say that they're eating more vegetables in terms of volume than anything else that they're eating during the day? Not many. And that's why we have to be very careful. First, get the basics down. And the basics essentially are this. You should be eating more vegetables than anything else. Plain and simple. That should be the dominant volume. If we look at volume of food, the dominant volume of food, the biggest portions on your plate, half to 3/4 of your plate, should essentially be non-starchy vegetable and low-sugar fruits. So that's going to be things like kale, chard, broccoli, cauliflower, lettuce greens, romaine, spinach, all of these types of things, plus berries, apples, pears, those kinds of things, sweet or less sweet fruits, water, and then good quality lean protein sources, chicken, buffalo, egg whites, tuna, all these kinds of things. Now, I am not anti-starch or anti-fat. It's just that the base of your meal should be these low-calorie, high-fiber, high-water foods like vegetables and low-sugar fruits, and these low-calorie, high-protein foods without fat and starch as a base. That should be most of what you are eating because that satiates you and does not provide a whole lot of calories. And then based on your personal preferences and your metabolic tendencies and your psychological sensitivities, you add in enough but not too much fat, sugar, salt, alcohol, that kind of thing. Instead of jumping on board with, I'll do intermittent fasting, or, I'm a paleo person, or, I am a, primal person, or, I'm a keto person, or, I heard fats are the best thing. Let your body tell you if fats are the best thing. Start with that as a base, right? Lots and 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 lots. I can't say it enough. Lots of vegetables. Good quality, lean, clean protein. By lean, clean protein, what I mean is preferably organic, grass-fed, free-range proteins, all that kind of stuff. Clean stuff to decrease the persistent organic pollutants you're getting in if you can, want to pay attention to that stuff. And low fat. And then add into that the extra fat and starch up to your tolerance. Then you can, once you get that taken care of, then you start to go into all these other types of things. Ooh, maybe I'll try the keto approach. Ooh, maybe I'll try intermittent fasting. Ooh, maybe I'll try, several other different techniques. Maybe I'll do a weekend detox or whatever and see if those things work for me or not. And I'll give you an example of this. For example, I do very well on intermittent fasting. I also I feel pretty good whenever I try a keto approach. But I have noticed every time I go keto and come off, I am essentially craving every carbohydrate in sight. And for me, my psychological sensitivities, I have a very difficult time overcoming that constant need for something starchy or sweet. And so any benefit I got from the keto diet seems to be wiped out, or at least I'm miserable trying to fight avoiding carbohydrates afterwards. So I tend to stay away from the keto diet as a result of that. But intermittent fasting works great for me. And so, again, absorb what is useful, discard what is not. I absorbed intermittent fasting. It works for me. I discarded what doesn't, keto diet. And I add what is uniquely my own. And what is uniquely my own is that I like to have wine at night as a way to sort of buffer and keep me from binging on stuff. And so I think that's my take on intermittent fasting. And that's also my take on the fact that, saying that anyone with a thyroid issue, intermittent fasting is a big no-no. I wouldn't say that. I would say this, though, and I think you're astute here. I have seen clinically that women with thyroid issues, PCOS, any kind of hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, thyroid, gonadal axis issues, essentially they're under more stress. And so an intermittent fasting diet, a keto diet, can put them under more stress and cause some issues. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Here's another related question to thyroid. Jade, the TSH range for thyroid function, in my opinion, is crazy. A thyroid with a TSH of 1.0 functions much differently than a TSH of 3.8 still in range. I've also seen this is the male client. This is the case in the male clients I have. Is food and exercise going to be able to regulate thyroid function? Okay, well, first of all, you're bringing up such a good point here with thyroid function. Just so everyone's clear, everyone listening, because I know these Q&A podcasts are actually some of the most popular podcasts that I do. If back when I was doing this for Metabolic Effects, so a lot of people just listen in on these, even though they're not their questions. So let's go through thyroid function really quick. First of all, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. This is the hormone that will be measured by your physician when you go to the doctor's office. When you get regular blood labs, this is the one that is kind of standard clinical practice or standard care. They'll measure TSH to rule out thyroid function. So let's go through thyroid function really quickly so I can help address some of the misconceptions about TSH and also the idea that you're going to be able to tell if 1.0 is a good TSH or 3.8 is a bad TSH. So thyroid stimulating hormone. The hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary, TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, and the pituitary releases then TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, the hypothalamus is an area of the brain. The pituitary is a gland near the brain, and this is the command and control center of the metabolism. So the hypothalamus says release TRH, then that signal gets sent to the pituitary, which releases TSH, and then TSH goes to the thyroid gland and tells the thyroid, hey, thyroid, make some thyroid hormone. Now remember, hormones are nothing but internal mailmen. They send signals, messages around the body. So the hypothalamus writes a letter and sends that letter to the pituitary. The pituitary reads that letter and says, oh, we better make some thyroid hormone. So the pituitary writes its own letter and sends its letter to the thyroid gland. Then the thyroid gland reads that letter and says, let's make thyroid hormone. Now the thyroid makes primarily T4. And T4 is not active thyroid. So T4 then goes out into the bloodstream and gets converted to T3 in several different areas, the liver, the kidney, and the digestive tract, believe it or not. And your gut bacteria can have some effect here as well. So thyroid can essentially cross the gut barrier in the lumen of the gut and basically have a situation where that is converted to T3 from T4, which T3 is the active. And part of it, as I'm saying that, I'm recognizing to myself, I don't know exactly how that conversion works. And so I'll have to go and look that up to see how exactly that happens in the digestive system. Is it happening in the lumen of the gut, or is it happening in and around the digestive system, or digestive tract? I'll have to look that up. But anyway, you get T4 converted to T3. T4 is inactive, T3 is active. Now, T4 can also get converted to reverse T3, which is inactive. And so now you have active thyroid T3, and that's what goes around into the cells of the body, and it has to bind to a receptor on the cell. And then, based on that, you'll get feedback also to the hypothalamus from T3 and T4, primarily T4, about how much thyroid is in the system. And so TSH is one small part of this thyroid thermostat. TSH makes T4. T4 has to be converted to T3. It can be converted to reverse T3, and then that T3 has to bind on the receptors. And so there's many, many different things that can go wrong here. So you can have a normal TSH of 1.0, and it can be functioning not very good if the thyroid receptors are not functioning. Just like you can have a TSH of 3.8, and it could be functioning a little bit better perhaps if the thyroid receptors are more hearing the signal. So you want to be careful of essentially saying, well, if someone has a TSH of 1.0 and someone else has a TSH of 3.8, that always means that one person's thyroid is functioning better than the other. Now, it probably means that most of the time, but I'm giving you a little bit of a clinical pearl here. You can have people with normal seeming optimal TSHs who still are not getting thyroid effects, primarily because of some of this reverse T3 issue or thyroid receptor issues, which we don't have a good way to measure. But in general, you're right. TSH of 1.0 is going to usually, in almost all cases, be a situation where you're like, that's functioning good, whereas a TSH of 3.8 maybe isn't. And just so you know, the normal ranges for TSH, depending on the lab, typically 4 to 5 is where we start saying you are now hypothyroid. But I'm just going through this in detail to give people, I don't want to depress you or confuse you. I'm just trying to help you understand this. The reason why this, a lot of doctors don't have this figured out is because it's complicated and there's a lot of stuff that we can't measure. And so lay individuals who are trying to do this it's even more complicated for them, so I'm just trying to give you that understanding because I know a lot of you are really savvy. And so the question then is food and exercise going to regulate this? Absolutely it can. And this is where some of the issues come in, because most physicians who are great people and do good work, they just aren't trained in nutrition. So what they're going to do is if they see your TSH up around 3.85, they're going to say, oh, they've got some, and you have hypothyroid symptoms, constipation, cold intolerance, foggy thinking, puffy eyes, those kinds of things, poor hair, nail, and skin growth. They're going to essentially say, all right, let's give them some thyroid hormone, usually Synthroid, which is T4. And what happens is they don't go any further than that. But sometimes you can have a situation where the person has high stress levels, high cortisol levels. High cortisol can decrease the conversion of T4 to T3. Sometimes you can have a situation perhaps where the stress is causing downregulation of the receptors on the hypothalamus. And so the hypothalamus isn't getting the signal that there's enough thyroid going around. So it sends a signal for more. Sometimes you can have an issue with iodine, where you want iodine and selenium and zinc, and you have deficiencies in these, and these are required for both making the thyroid hormone and the conversion. And probably most importantly and most famously now, at least it's the in vogue thing, is that you can have cross-reactivity immune issues. It's most associated with gluten intolerance, we think, but we're not quite sure yet. But Hashimoto's thyroiditis is a condition of autoimmune thyroid dysfunction that can be related to food allergens, and we have seen clinically, none of us, despite what we say, none of us in the functional medicine world are quite sure exactly how this mechanism happens, but we do think that we know it happens through a situation where the immune system goes, awry, for lack of a better term, at the level of the GI tract, and then the thyroid starts to be attacked by your own immune cells, and that by fixing the gut, and when I say, quote, fixing the gut, I mean doing gut integrity-based programs, which is eliminating foods that are, for lack of a better term, abrasive to the gut, and eliminating allergens that cause immune reactions in the gut, and giving proper probiotics and glutamine to repair the gut lining. I have seen, and many, many, many functional doctors have seen, people's antibodies for thyroid go down. And so, yes, food and dietary and exercise changes definitely make a difference. I myself have seen both my TPO and TBG antibodies go down after allergy elimination diets, and I pretty much keep them down in general just by living the lifestyle that I live. And so, yes, food and exercise definitely make a difference, but your standard physician probably isn't going to know to do that. Now, I'll give you another caveat here. That doesn't mean that every single person that has Hashimoto's, that you're going to be able to solve their problem with these allergy elimination diets and things like that. Some people you won't, either due to compliance issues, but I've had plenty of people in my clinical practice that I've treated that I didn't seem to get a handle on their Hashimoto's, even with allergy elimination diets, for whatever reason. So there's a lot we don't know. But yes, that's what you would want to do. So hopefully that explains some of the thyroid piece there. Another question here about posterior, and I have a question about posterior and anterior pelvic tilts and cues for the squat, and whether or not the isometric squeeze puts too much pressure on the SI joint. Well, this particular question is kind of getting away from my area of expertise. Yes, I have 25 years in the strength and conditioning world. However, I will fully admit that I am not a movement expert. And uh, what has happened, which has been absolutely incredible and wonderful since probably the 2000, is that there's been a rash of individuals who've been looking at these kinds of things, movement, posterior, anterior tilts, all the different ways to move, hypermobility, hypomobility, fascial interactions, and all this kind of stuff. I am not the guy who is the expert in that. As a matter of fact, I'm a novice when it comes to that. I will offer some just general things here that I think could be interesting. First of all, I do think it is, I'll say this, 90+% of the time, moving more and getting stronger is going to lead to moving better. And so I'm not a big fan of, nor have I seen it in my career as a strength conditioning specialist, all this prehab type of work doing a whole lot of good for your average exerciser. And potentially waste time. So I love doing that stuff, and I do it myself on my days off, but I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about those kinds of things in the gym. The other thing I would say is for the squat, the squat is one of these things that you're going to have to do regardless your whole life. And so the idea then is that we all have varying, postures and various tilts and various ways of standing and various angles of the, SI joint and, the femur, and the way it fits into the hip socket and all of that kind of stuff. We're all very different. And so the idea that we're going to be able to get everyone moving perfectly and that there's a perfect way to do things is probably not true in my personal opinion. But this is something that, I would like to have someone who's an expert on debate me with. But I guess my point here is that I can't imagine that doing isometric squeezes at the top of a squat are going to put too much pressure on the SI joint. Nor can I imagine that once you've got past proper squat form in general, without being too much of a form Nazi about the anterior and posterior pelvic tilts, that the squat is going to be one of the most beneficial movements to strengthen the legs and the hips and to make sure, even if the SI joint is slightly dysfunctional, that at least you have all of the ligaments and tendons and muscles around that SI joint to protect it. So that would be my take on that. But that's something you're going to want to really talk about with someone who's more of an expert than I on this. Okay, so next question. Okay. Hi, Jade. I would like help with postmenopausal vaginal dryness. I've lost weight with your programs and clean eating, which has been great, but I'm still struggling with vaginal dryness. Oils and creams are okay, but the dryness deep in the vagina is extremely painful. Okay, this is something that obviously is going to be very difficult for women because you want to think about this. This is an area that, if dry, any kind of friction is going to cause pain. We all kind of know what that's like, having dry lips, very dry lips, and trying to talk, and having those lips crack and break and be very painful, and then us trying to apply some kind of salve to that to get the lips to essentially be less painful. And so this is something that can come up a lot. And what we do know, we do have answers to this. Estrogen is responsible for a lot of the secretions that keep the vagina soft and supple and moist. And so this is a clear sign, one of the primary indications that there is low estrogen, and this is why some women in menopause start to get this effect. And so you'll have all kinds of different approaches to deal with this. The best approach is going to be some type of estrogen therapy. Now, if this is vaginal dryness around the vulva, then a estrogen topical cream works really, really well. If this is deep into the vagina like you're talking about here, then you're probably going to want to do an estrogen, either a biased, a bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, or, traditional hormone replacement therapy to deal with that. Now, if that's not an option for you and you're not wanting to do bioidenticals or traditional hormone replacement therapy, I believe that I'm trying to think of the name for it. I think it's replenish vaginal moisturizer. This is the one I believe it's available over the counter that can work very well for individuals. I'm assuming, based on your question, this has not been working for you. Another great one, and it's one that many people use as a sexual lubricant as well, is coconut oil. Coconut oil is definitely something that you can try intravaginally. You also may want to be looking at probiotic therapies as well, intravaginally or taking them orally as well. And one of the things we now know is taking oral probiotics, believe it or not, can change the vaginal flora as well, which is really interesting to me anyway. That happens, to a lot of us. And then another one that's really interesting and actually has, I believe it has some research in this realm, is maca. Maca is an interesting one for vaginal dryness, and has actually been shown in some studies to help with vaginal dryness as well. And so those of you who don't know, and maca has been shown to raise estrogen levels, which is why that may be something to help with. The typical dose is 2,000 milligrams per day of maca, and maca is really nice actually because it's a pretty neutral flavor. It's typically comes in a green powder, and you can sprinkle that on different things and blend it into your smoothie. Also, you want to test and see what's going on with your vitamin D levels. D as in David, and vitamin E in a dose of about 400 IU per day is another thing that has been shown. I believe, and I'm kind of talking off the top of my head now, but I believe vitamin E as in Edward, is also something that can help with vaginal dryness. Now, these kind of supplements it's going to take some time for them to work, but I would definitely be looking at the maca, the potential to use replenish or replens rather, and also coconut oil perhaps. So, yeah, I hate that you're dealing with that. It's one of those things that, in my clinical career working with menopausal women is a common complaint, but hopefully that gets you started on this. All right, let's see what the next questions are. Let's see. Okay, so my endocrinologist, this is a little bit of a longer question. And when you guys send these questions in, if you could, try to make them as short as possible. But let's see if I can, I'll just read it. It's about a paragraph. My endocrinologist is an ND. I've been on bioidentical progesterone and testosterone, as well as thyroid medications, Nature Thyroid, for 2 years. My most recent visit last month shows I bottomed out on estrogen. The lab results said that they were abnormally low. I also went an entire year without getting a period, so I'm officially through perimenopause and in menopause now. My doctor said it could be why I've gained 10 pounds this past year despite doing all the right things. Might this also explain why I've not been able to lose inches or pounds on the metabolic renewal program? I'm definitely more toned and stronger, but no size or weight loss in 11 weeks of the program. In the workouts, you talk about estrogen making HGH, but if I was out of estrogen, would that happen? Okay, I'm just going to stop here because I don't say that estrogen makes HGH. I say that estrogen and human growth hormone work well together, but they're not required. But estrogen, which women are higher in, and a intense workout that produces HGH, those two together can have some good synergistic fat burning and muscle building effects. My testosterone was also low, even with the bioidentical supplementation, but my progesterone was normal and my thyroid levels perfect. My doctor has added bioidentical estrogen and a higher dose of testosterone to my medicines, and I just received them this week. I'm hoping they will help. By the way, I'm going to stay with the program, not giving up just because I haven't gotten the body to respond yet. Okay, so it sounds like this is a person who's doing my metabolic renewal program. For those who don't know, this is a program that is extremely popular. It's probably the best-selling program that I've ever done, either that or Aftershock, and it's specifically for women. And it's one of the only programs, I think it is the only program that addresses the different hormonal types for women. Now, one of the things I'll say again that I said in the beginning is we have to be careful to go off on this idea that it's only hormones. The first thing I would say is are you doing everything right? Bottom line is, when you talk about weight loss, it is about calories first. So doing everything right means you better be getting that calorie reduction in. It's not about these hormones. However, these hormones can make it more likely that you might burn fat or burn muscle instead of burning fat. Or it might be a situation where it makes you more likely to store fat instead of burn fat. So yes, they can have an effect. Obviously, estrogen is a hormone that speeds up metabolic rate. It helps you be more insulin sensitive. It helps you build a little bit, helps you be anti-cortisol. And so all these things could potentially impact schmeck, sleep, hunger, mood, energy, and cravings, and make it easier for you to lose weight. However, the research on this is mixed. What they typically show is that hormones, whether bioidentical or traditional hormone replacement therapy, and especially testosterone in women, may have a slight weight gain effect, not a weight losing effect, and but that it does have an effect of reducing fat storage around the middle, which would make sense because estrogen and progesterone keep the waist smaller on a woman. But the interesting thing is that these things may actually cause weight gain. You might say, well, why? Well, hormone replacement therapy, whether it's oral contraceptive replacement therapy, whether it's an IUD like a Mirena, or whether it's hormone replacement therapy in menopause, speeds up the metabolism. And you might say, well, that's a good thing, isn't it, Jade? But anything that speeds up the metabolism can also speed up hunger and cravings. And so when you say you're doing everything right, let's go back to the basics. What's everything right? Most people think diet and exercise is everything right. But when it comes to menopause, estrogen is an anti-cortisol and anti-stress hormone. When estrogen goes away, all these stress hormones go up, making you more insulin resistant, making you more likely to, remember, stress, cortisol, cravings, making you more likely to want to overeat and slowing down some of, sort of the fat burning processes. And so you want to be going into a situation where you're managing stress like crazy. So menopause, what's right? First of all, walk a ton. Second of all, manage stress like crazy, meaning, sleeping, naps, massage, sex, orgasm, meditation, hot bath, sauna, all of that kind of stuff. That is critical. Walking also in there, moving a lot, and then making sure you're reducing your carbohydrates probably a little bit more than you used to because you're probably a little bit more insulin resistant now. But yes, these hormones are probably impacting things, but believe it or not, and I know this is confusing, and we think that, oh, well, if my hormones were low, I can just add them back in, and that's going to, solve the problem. And that's not the way the hormones work. So let me give you a simple analogy for this. Imagine a symphony, a beautiful symphony where everybody's working really well together, and you got this professional group of musicians, and then you go through, and let's say the flutes. The flutes are, in this analogy, estrogen. So then you go through menopause and you take all the flutes out. Well, that's obviously going to change the song and make it very difficult to play all the songs, and the symphony is not going to sound nearly as good and going to have some difficulties. Now you come in and you just grab some other flutes. Maybe they're inferior. Maybe they're not flutes at all. Maybe they're like, they look slightly different. Maybe they're those plastic flutes we used to learn to play with when we were in high school, right? I forget what those things are called, but it's certainly not going to sound the same, and it may sound worse. And so the idea that you're just going to put in, some hormones and, see the effects that you would see and everything's going to get easier is not true. Your primary thing is going to be the lifestyle changes. And so when I see people say, I'm doing everything right, you're not doing everything right if it's not working. And so what that means is you have to play metabolic detective, and that doesn't mean just going on hormone replacement therapy. And so in this particular case, I wouldn't care too much about all these numbers and estrogen and progesterone and testosterone and all that stuff. I would just be like, okay, I'm in a different metabolic state now, and what is right then, or what I think is right, may not be right for me now, and I have to find that. And that is the whole point of that metabolic renewal program. There's a whole section that I know a lot of people want to miss in that program and skip over that goes through the metabolic detective work, the AIM process, assess, investigate, modify. You can't just follow that program as a recipe. You have to follow the part of that program that teaches you to adjust on the fly. That's a big part of why I put that in there, but I know it's not always what people want to see. All right. Okay, so Jade, can you speak a little bit more on erections and what does this say? Oh, erections and greens. Okay, this is probably referring to, I have a recent podcast I did. What was that? Just like last episode or the episode before last on testosterone and erections. And, it's funny. Guys always want to know about their erections, and women always want to know about the men in their lives' erections, because obviously, unlike, women, men have to perform and have to have a degree of erectile function to copulate, to successfully have intercourse. And so one of the things I was talking about in that particular episode, and anyone who's interested in this, I did a whole episode on erections, but absolutely we now know that greens, and by greens I mean vegetables, salads, interestingly enough, some of the things that we used to think had no real nutritive value, things like regular old iceberg lettuce and romaine. These things are very rich in nitrates, nitrogen source. Beets are as well. So beets, spinach, all lettuces, romaine, chard, all these things have nitrates in it. All these greens have nitrates in it. Now, you probably heard of nitrates because this is the same thing that people will put on bacon and things like that. So there's all this hoopla around, get nitrate-free bacon, and this stuff is bad for you and this and that, and it might cause cancers and stuff. But actually, plant material has way, way, way more nitrate than the nitrates in meat. And it also comes along with antioxidants and things like that, making the formation of cancerous compounds potentially cancerous causing compounds like nitrosamines to form, which may be an issue, may be an issue in nitrate-laden meats. But anyway, these nitrates, when we eat them, are acted upon by bacteria in our back of our throat and on the back of our tongue, and these bacteria will change the nitrate into nitrite. And our bodies will also try to grab that nitrogen and concentrate it in the salivary glands so that when we chew, we can release more of this nitrate and then have it turn into nitrite, which then is turned into nitric oxide in our body, which is basically the erection biochemical. Nitric oxide is responsible for dilating the arteries going into the penis. And so one of the things that, if you have a guy who's having issues with this and they're on testosterone therapy, they obviously don't have diabetes. First, rule out any issues like that. And they're on testosterone therapy and still not seeing a lot with their erections, then it's going to be either a stress-related effect or potentially they're just not eating enough greens or don't have a good nitrogen storage capacity. And actually, this is something you can test. You can go on and search for nitrate strips, nitrogen strips, and put your saliva on this to see how much of this you have. And it's funny, I've had so many guys do this, and you'll see that there is, I don't have a study to quote to you, nor can I say it's 100%, but I can say the individuals who have low nitrates on these strips tend to be the ones who are dealing with erections that they're not 100% satisfied with, either full-on erectile dysfunction or an erection that is not as full and as strong as it once was. And so that's the connection between nitrates, greens, and erections. So hopefully that makes some sense. Okay, so next question. Hi, Jay. Do antidepressants raise cortisol levels? Okay, wow. You guys are definitely asking me questions today that are sort of out of my realm of expertise. I'm not an expert in antidepressants to the degree that I'd like to be, but I do know a few things because I read a lot of research, so I'll tell you what I know here. Well, first of all, when you think of antidepressants, there's many different types. There's SSRIs, serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. There's SNRIs, selective or serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. And there's MAO inhibitors, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And they all work by slightly different mechanisms. And it's really interesting because my recollection in the research, which I haven't read in some time, but my recollection is that the way this has gone, it's been a confusing issue around how exactly are antidepressants working, right? How are they working? Are they really, is it because they're raising serotonin levels in the brain, or are there other mechanisms? And what has ended up happening is there is a correlation between antidepressants and stress hormones. By the way, norepinephrine is one, so is epinephrine, noradrenaline and adrenaline, and cortisol is one. So do antidepressants raise cortisol levels? Well, I am aware of some studies which may be different now, and so I'll have to check on this as well, that essentially have shown that when you take antidepressants, what is happening is, and the study that I'm thinking about right now is they had a group of individuals who basically took salivary cortisol profiles, and what they showed is that those cortisol profiles were blunted oftentimes with the antidepressants. So my recollection is not that antidepressants might raise cortisol levels, but actually may suppress them rather than raise them. And so that's why I'm a little bit confused by this question, but I could be wrong about that. What I would guess, by the way, is that, and this is typically how it goes, is you're going to find that this is going to be different based on different individuals and probably based on different medications that you're taking. And I guess the question would be, why do we want and why are we worried about this to this degree? Because I think the question, when I see a question like this, it basically is like, well, I'm on antidepressants. If it's raising cortisol levels, isn't that causing me to be fat, right? Because we tend to think cortisol is bad. But cortisol, when it comes to depression, cortisol could be a good thing. You want enough cortisol, not too much cortisol. Too much cortisol, we definitely know, has a negative impact on nerve synapses and can downregulate nerve transmission impulses and things like that. Too much cortisol is not a good thing for the nervous system to be bathed in. However, not enough cortisol. Cortisol also, we know, is needed to sensitize much of the receptors. So a certain base level of cortisol is needed. And so what probably is going on, I would imagine, this is a complete guess, but that if an antidepressant is working effectively, it is probably working by the mechanisms we now know, serotonin or epinephrine or whatever, but also probably having an effect of regulating cortisol levels in some way, or at least resensitizing the brain to cortisol levels, so that it probably is a fact that people who are depressed are either going to have very low cortisol levels or very high cortisol levels, and maybe these antidepressants are acting as cortisol adaptogens, and perhaps that is what's happening there. But that is something that is not my area of expertise, although I do have a little bit of reading under my belt in that regard. But again, just like the question before, that's something that probably I'm going to want to look at and revisit later. And I'll try to remember in the next Q&A podcast to come back to that question. It's an interesting one. Okay, I'm going to take one final question, and then we'll call it for this time. Let's see. Okay, Jade, how long should I be breastfeeding? All right, this is an interesting question because it goes back to the other one. So what does the research typically say on this? And, again, I realize that this comes up a lot because breastfeeding mothers definitely don't lose weight as fast, but it is highly, highly beneficial for the child. And so the research says 6 to 9 months is really where you want to be. 6 months, at least 6 months, I would say, for health benefits based on what I've read, up to 9 months. And of course, you can go a little bit longer than that. Obviously, after about a year, it starts to become a little bit taboo. But we certainly, that food is still nutritive to the to the baby, to the child, to the infant. And so certainly it's a mother's choice. That would be my first answer. Is like, as long as the mother wants to, you should not be beating up on yourself if you choose not to breastfeed. You shouldn't be judging someone who does breastfeed. And it's a woman's choice. However, if you're just talking about the data that we have, suggests that breastfeeding, this is clear in the research, that breastfeeding is by far the best thing that you can do for your baby health-wise. So from that perspective, breastfeeding is fantastic and recommended by pretty much any good quality healthcare provider is going to recommend you breastfeed your child. For how long? 6 to 9 months is where you want to be. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end there. I'm right about an hour, and thanks so much. If you guys want to participate in the Q&A podcast, you can go to patreon.com/Jade Teta and sign up there, and then you'll get a welcome, and you can begin to submit your questions for these calls. All right, guys, thanks so much, and I will see you at the next podcast. Pop it in real quick just to say thank you so much for your interest and support of the JadeTeta.com podcast. I am bringing back by popular demand the live Q&A calls I used to do back in the day, where you can get on live with me, ask your question directly, and have me answer it in full. Questions about thyroid and adrenal health, autoimmune disease, any health condition, belly fat, muscle building, performance enhancement, you name it, we are going to cover it on the Q&A podcast. If you'd like to be on these live Q&A calls with me and speak to me directly, all you need to do is become a patron of the podcast. You can go to www.patreon.com/Jade Teta. That's www.patreon.com/Jade Teta. Become a patron of the podcast. I would greatly appreciate your support, and you'll be able to access me live to answer all your questions in depth. Thanks again for your support. See you on the podcast.